thank you all for inviting me to do this. And hello from the United States, in New Hampshire, which is in the Northeast of the United States. So happy to be here, and I see that you have a great conference put together. So just a little bit about me. Gosh, I grew up in New York City, and I started out as a New York City public school teacher. And since then, I've been really all over the world, doing various things in education, including alternative education. One of the things that I do is I help run an organization called Arrow, which is the Alternative Education Resource Organization. I also currently am the director of counseling and outreach at Franklin Pierce University here in the States. I'm also an adjunct instructor in the Doctoral of Educational Leadership program at Southern New Hampshire University. And I do kind of a lot of other things in there. And my journey has been really kind of everything from, like I said, like, a public school setting to I was also, and I'm going to say this in air quotes, the principal of a democratic school, which really means I was the guy who signed the papers, but I never made any decisions, right? So because somebody had to sign the papers, kind of thing, right? So so I really have been my journey has really been about empowerment, right? And empowerments of young people, and how do you do that? And so that's what we're going to talk a little bit about today. So I wanted to make this more of a discussion format, and I see we have a small group of people, and if more come in, that's great. But I'd really love to have this be more of a discussion. Before we launch into that, I feel like I'd be remiss if I didn't just mention what happened a couple of days ago here in the States in one of our schools in Texas. And it's something that actually impacts me pretty closely, because I've had that experience only just about a couple of years ago, and also what I do from the mental health side and that kind of thing. So I just wanted to mention that, and it's not anything we need to discuss. If it comes up, great, we can certainly do that. But I just felt like I'd be remiss if I didn't mention that. So again, thank you all for being here. And I'd like to start off with a question, if you don't mind, for all of you, and you can put it in the chat or you can unmute yourself. However you like to do it is fine. But what is empowerment? I'll give you a moment to, like I said, you can unmute or you can drop it in the chat. When you hear empowerment, what is it? What does it mean?
Can I answer?
Yeah, please.
To me, it's empowerment is like, if you are given the power, it's pretty useless to you if you don't know it or if you don't know how to use it. So to me, empowerment is having the power, but also the knowledge as to what you can do with it. If that makes sense?
Yes. Yeah. Great. And I see something in the chat. Yeah, feel free, anyone, to keep going, or again, unmute yourself if you like. Okay. By the way, if you see me look down to the right, I'm just writing things down as they come up. So I'm not like off, somewhere like, hey, forgot he's on. It's not that. So.
Yeah, Peter, I agree with the other definitions there. I kind of went into feeling it. So when I'm empowered, I feel certainty. So yeah, so there's certainty with who I am and what decisions I'm making, and I'm allowed to. I feel I either take the permission and assume that I'm allowed to, or somebody's actually said, yes, you're in control of this space at the moment. Yeah, so you have, yeah, that space, certainty. Yeah.
All right. Other thoughts? Let's take maybe one more minute. And okay, permission. All right. All right. Well, thank you for those. Those are great. And I always say about empowerment is it's not this thing that you can just hand
A real
somebody.
person.
Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah. So I'd ring the duty social worker. And discover whether this is a real person or whether it's somebody playing games. Does that make sense?
Yes, yes, yes. So I think you
Really well said.
hit on a really important point there.
Oh, well, I'm not surprised.
I think it's somebody accidentally. It sounded like there was somebody on the phone rather than.
Yeah, so I was more, I didn't know if they were talking to me or so that's why I paused there for a second. All right,
I've just
so
muted everybody. If I've muted you by accident and you were actually talking, then I'm really sorry. You can unmute yourself again.
well, I'm going to go ahead and continue. So yeah, so I think there's some really important points here, right? And so what I was saying is that you don't just hand somebody empowerment, right? It's not okay, now you're empowered, right? I hand you this thing. I think it's a process, and some of you really really drill down on the idea of, well, I have to know what I can do, right? Or I have to assume that, right? It's either like I know it through experience, or I know it because I've had conversations, or I've just kind of assumed my empowerment, right? I just kind of took it over kind of idea. And I don't mean like a radical overthrow. I mean, kind of like, okay, I have agency. I can do these things. And so I know a lot of you here are, homeschoolers, or you're in some sort of setting that is the Learn Free conference, right? The idea of free learning or self-directed. I know Peter Gray was just speaking, I think about an hour ago. And so his idea of self-directed education or self-directed learning. And so I think through that, right, through those kinds of ideas where it's not so much that you're telling somebody, right, okay, now you're empowered, right? Certainly you could have those conversations, but it's really what they feel, right? Somebody said, permission, and it's the idea of, okay, now I understand, right, that I have this. I can take control over the way these things happen. Now, I can control the things that I can control. I can't control the weather, right? I can't control how other people, react or respond or whatever, but I can control the things, the way my life takes shape. And so that's a lot about empowerment. We're going to talk a lot about those things today. And like I said, and this will be more of a conversation rather than a presentation. So one of the main things I think, in at least what I've found in my experience for empowerment is, again, it's really about this idea of, what are the day-to-day interactions, right? What does that look like? And and parents ask me this a lot, and I get asked this question a lot. So what do I do? Right. So it's nice that you said that, right? But now what do I do? Right? What does that actually look like? And so really there's kind of a bigger thing here. And I hope you can bear with me for a couple minutes. So a lot of it is contextual. So that means that in certain contexts, you're going to have certain things that let's say, you're homeschoolers, and a lot of what you do is based, and when I say in the home, I mean that it's kind of based there, right? I'm sure there's other things around it, but it's sort of like the idea of you're not necessarily going to a place every single day that's called school, right? It's like the school around you kind of idea, or learning is everywhere idea. And so it's kind of like in those day-to-day interactions, how much say does the child, the young person, have in what's going on? How much agency are they given? How much responsibility are they given? So I grew up in a time in New York City where, at 8 years old, I was taking the subway, right? I was walking to school. I was doing all of those things, right? Even before that. And yeah, there were people around. I'm not saying I was totally on my own, but a lot of times I was doing things like that on my own, and I was given a lot of responsibility. And so, and some of it, honestly, I don't think my parents were like, oh, we're doing free learning, right? And they really weren't thinking about that. I think it was more out of necessity, right? It was more because that's how it had to be, with both parents working and doing whatever, and having other siblings and all of that. So I think it sort of arose from that, that again, it's out of necessity. So what I'm saying is contextual. There's going to be some things in individual context that you have to take note of. Your context and your individual situation isn't going to be the same as someone else's. So a lot of that is, so within that, how can you, and I'm going to throw this question out here and to give you some time to think about it. And again, same thing, either put your answer in the chat or, unmute yourself and, tell me what you think. And I'm sure there's a lot of these things that you're already doing. So within your individual context, right, your individual situation, how are you able to, make that space for young people to feel empowered? And so again, it's through that kind of idea of, they have a lot of say. They can make choices. And their choices are, look, we know sometimes kids, right, are going to make a choice where like, whoa, I don't know, right, that may not work out, right? That's wow. And so I would say if it's that, I would sort of let them go through the process. Obviously, if it's dangerous, right, if they're climbing a tree and you're not sure and you're like, okay, describe to me how you're going to do that. I'm a little concerned that branch there looks like it might be dead. What are you, and things like that. And like when you go up, watch your footing. Not, oh my God, I'm right. Because I think once that happens, it's sort of the idea of empowerment is sort of like, okay, it's sort of back in the adult's hands, which sometimes we need to do. I get it. In an emergency situation, we need to sometimes take over, right? So again, my question is, in your individual context, what are some things that you either are already doing, or that you can do, to empower the young people in your life? So again, it could be, you can unmute or you can just throw it in the chat.
Okay, while everybody's typing, I'll look. To me, it's really, really difficult because it goes against everything that is like has been put into me, if that makes sense. So even from when my eldest, she's 13 now, but when she was little, I went to a conference and they were talking about this sheep that's in this tiny little cage. What's it going to learn unless it gets to go into bigger pastures? So I'm still really struggling with this. And then we moved from a tiny flat to a big farmhouse, so actually I don't see my kids very often now, but they're still not allowed to get off the premises very often. So I think a couple of weeks ago they asked if they could go down, cross the road where 70 miles an hour. They wanted to go not cross it, go along it, and then go down to where the river is. And I wanted to say no. I really wanted to say no, because somebody in a van is going to come and snatch them while they're on this road. And all these things that are happening in your head that are not very likely to, I mean, Peter Gray spoke about very, very similar things to this, about, actually letting them go off on their own and learn what's okay and what's not. So, and I grew up like that. I was 4 and I was walking home from kindergarten by myself. And at 6, I went to primary school walking far. It was far, but I did it by myself. So, it's a very, very different culture, and I'm only just starting to actually allow them to do more things, and it's difficult because everything in me just wants to keep them and protect them, but it's actually detrimental to them, isn't it? So it's hard.
I mean, just I'll jump in here, and I know some people are thinking and typing some things in here. So, I mean, so I think we have to be careful about. So there's the the idea of and look, I run in a lot of circles and that are like totally hands off by adults, right? Like even if you see a child walking towards something, and I'm like, I'm not really down with that. That's not how I think that there are times when adults need to intervene, right? When you can tell that they're headed, they're headed for danger, kind of idea, right? Walking on the road, I think, is different, right? Because you understand it's more of a controlled environment, right? It's more, they've probably have done things like that before, or they're at the point where you feel like they can do that, right? They're able to, or you're at least at the point where you're like, you know what, I'm going to give them the option to do it. There's a woman by the name of Dana Martin. She's written a couple of books. She's actually going to speak at the Aero conference coming up in June. And she has 4 kids, I believe. And she taught, well, and they're all completely different, number one. And she's always done like unschooling, right? Or free learning. And she tells the story of how her then 7-year-old wanted to cook an entire meal. I don't even remember what the meal was, but it was like, it included using frying pans and things like that, hot oil, stuff like that. And immediately, right, she went to that kind of place of like, oh, right. But then realized that, she was there, right? She wasn't hovering over her child, but she was there if they needed assistance. And I want to try to, kind of shorten her story. And basically what it came down to is there was really only 2 times where she felt like she really needed to kind of be there and say, wait, that pan that you have those in, or it's pretty heavy, right? So, you know what I mean? And it's full of hot oil kind of thing, right? And then there was another time where just the way the child had things sort of laid out, not that it was necessarily like in imminent danger, but it was, some things were about to kind of crash onto the floor kind of idea, right? So so there were really only 2 times where she felt like she really needed to intervene. Said, the meal didn't come out all that great, but it was really a learning experience. And so I think the idea, and a lot of us are conditioned for this, especially as adults, and we're seen as the caregivers, right? And we're supposed to protect children. And I think that's all okay. I think having that idea of, an understanding where young people are at developmentally, right? A 4-year-old is different than a 12-year-old. They're just different, right? I mean, they're at different stages. You were mentioning walking home from school at 4, right? I mean, that's, a 4-year-old can do that, right? A 4-year-old can help. A 4-year-old can pass you things, right? A 4-year-old can, there's things that they can do, right? And then obviously as they're developing and they're experience things, you'll notice that they're going to be ready for more and more things, right? And someone wrote here in the chat, allowing them to choose what they want to learn and to explore their interests. Yeah, so that's like the main premise behind self-directed education or self-directed learning, right? I think Megan said, how easy has that been, or difficult has that been to do that? Do you find it easy? Do you find it difficult? Somewhere in the middle?
I find it in the middle because as a mum, I'm like, I want to say, oh, you need to learn this or you need to learn that and get prepared for, I don't know, going to, secondary school type work and things like that. Whereas I know if I leave him be and let him go and explore things, then normally he'll start making things or come back and show me stuff that he's learnt that I had no idea he had any idea about. Does that make sense?
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. And so if you don't mind me asking, was this kind of something you came into like later on, or is this kind of how you were educated, or you know what I mean?
No, I was going to say I fell into it after my youngest was in school for a year, but it didn't suit him, so we came out.
That's
Yeah,
amazing.
and it's been a big learning curve, but 4 years in now.
Yeah, that's amazing. And so it's interesting that you said the learning curve, and I'm glad that you said that, because there's no script, right? And I think that's sort of the spirit of it, right? Really is no script, and there's no real one way to do it or not do it. I just say, when people talk to me about this, I'm like, if you're intervening all the time and you're the one that's calling all the shots, then it's not self-directed, right? You're directing it, right? Are there times again where, look, as we know, sometimes, kids will come up with an idea that's a brilliant idea, but it's like, wow, that's going to cost about £1,000,000, right, to do that.
Mhm.
And I don't know that we can do that right now. Yeah, it's a great idea. Let's pursue it, right? Let's see what we can do with that. See, that's different, right? Not to totally shut it down. Like, wait, that's gonna, right? It's like, well, I don't know that we can do that right now, but how can we get there? And have them kind of explore that, right? And understand. And it's okay that they come up against things like that, because that's the point. The point is to yeah, and right, discussing, right? And like the the way we all learn a lot of times is, through things that maybe don't work out quite the way we thought or we wanted. Some of them, through mistakes. And we were all just talking about, like, and something that Peter Gray mentioned is kind of letting kids figure those things out. I always say this, and don't get me wrong, I'm not condoning this, but my parents, like, if I said, yeah, I'm going to be, down the street here, I was never down the street, right? They knew that. It was kind of like they knew that I was never going to be there, right? But it was like they also knew, right, that I would be able to figure things out, right? If I got in a situation, which a lot of times we did. I mean, we were kids and we got in situations where we had to get ourselves out. And so I'm not condoning kids lying to their parents. I don't mean that, but the fact that to allow them that experience of figuring things out. Well, wow, I told my mother is going to be here. If I call her on the phone now and she knows I'm not going to be here, I wasn't there. What do I do, right? How do I figure out this situation? And sometimes they're going to have to make a decision between, what, this is serious enough that I still need to call a parent, right? And even though I wasn't where I was supposed to be, this is still serious enough that I really need this help. Or, what, I can kind of figure this out on my own. And I can, this is not a real serious situation, things like that. That's so it's the idea of having those kinds of experiences. And yeah, I definitely discussing things. So a couple of things I want to lead into from that is, we talk about empowerment, and we're talking about a lot of sort of the practical kinds of hands-on things. And a lot of it really comes down to, right, taking young people seriously, trusting them and respecting them, right? And even when you don't agree on things, right, to be able to have that, right, have that kind of, and it's okay to challenge them a bit too. Like, what, I don't know about that, right? Like, you're saying this, but hasn't been what I've witnessed or experienced. What do you think about that? What's going on there? Right. And again, maybe with a 4-year-old, it's going to be a different kind of conversation that way, but the idea is the same. A 4-year-old and a 15-year-old, right? The dialogue's going to be different, and there's certain things you're going to be able to go into, maybe a little deeper or in kind of a different way. But it's kind of that same idea. So you're not shutting it down, right? You're saying, no, I want to hear what you have to say about this, because I'm really not seeing it that way right now, or I didn't have a similar experience. So can you help me out? I say that to I mean, I work mostly now with college aged young people, But I've had a lot of experience with, middle school and high school and even younger students. And I would say to them, help me understand, help me, because you've had this experience. My experience and your experience is different. We could witness the same event and it's still going to be different, right? Because I see the world through my lens, through the lens of my own experiences. So help me see it through your lens. Now, it doesn't always get to where you want, but at least it's the conversation, and you're discussing, and it's taking that seriously and taking them seriously. That's a lot of the crux of all of this, right? It doesn't mean you have to agree with every idea they come up with. It doesn't mean you're going to be able to implement every idea they come up with. It's also putting it kind of back to them, right? To say, okay, you have this idea. It looks like your idea right now is going to cost a lot of money. So we may not be, right now it doesn't look like we can do that, but help me understand it. Are there other things that we can do? What other things can we do? How can we move towards that goal? That's the other thing. I want to just kind of pause just to read some of the comments here. Yeah, asking powerful questions. Absolutely. Attachment parenting. Yeah. Actually, the woman I mentioned, Dana Martin, actually does. I think one of her books is even about that, about attachment parenting. So yeah, asking those, profound and powerful questions, or even like the what if questions. Like, what if we did this? What would that look like? And I think the reverse of that is when young people are asking those what if questions, to be able to, again, have that dialogue, like, hey, what if we did this? What if my bedtime was 11:30 and right? Like, even things like that, even small things, right? Where, again, a lot of people in, homeschooling and self-directed environments have, young people kind of choose their own bedtime or kind of do it naturally, that kind of idea. So there's that too. So I think though, to me, those are really the crux of the things in terms of, when we say empowerment, it's about, because if I were to say, okay, you're empowered, and I've said that, I've done it. Trust me, I've done it. I've walked down that road where I would say to a classroom, okay, you're empowered to do this. And then they'd all look at me like, what do you mean? Okay. Then I realized, what? I have to kind of build this. And we talked about empowerment, what does it mean? What does it look like? And that's an important discussion, but it's also through the fact that they're able to experience it, right? So I look at it, I always say this, I'm not empowering, I'm clearing space for them to be empowered, right? I'm making the space, or I'm clearing the space. That's really what I'm doing. I'm not just, okay, boom, here's your empowerment. It's not really about that. It's about creating the conditions, right? Clearing the space, creating the space. However, there's a lot of ways to sort of spin that idea. But that's how I look at it. There's a couple of really good comments in here. I just want to make sure I look at. Yeah, so those are really two important points. So, and I've done this, and I'm sure we've all done it, right? You want to answer the question right away. They ask you a question, right? You ask them a question, right? And then you give them the answer, right? Or they come to you, hey, how much does a butterfly weigh? I don't know, I'm making stuff up, right? And like, okay, if you know the answer, look, a little bit of that sometimes, like, they really just want a quick, if it's a quick thing so they can kind of get back to some other things that they're doing. So there's a little bit of nuance with that, and a little bit of kind of feeling it out. But yes, I mean, not always answering the questions right away. What do you think? How would we find that out? Things like that. Oh, how much does a butterfly weigh? Well, how much do you think it weighs? Okay, I think it weighs, 10 pounds. Okay. Okay, why do you think that? What other things weigh 10? You know what I mean? Like things like that. So giving the answer, but you're having them continue the exploration. And like I said, there are times where sometimes that little bit of an answer, like, hey, where can I, I need something to cut this with, right? That kind of, you know what I mean? Where should I look? Something like that. Okay, look over there. I think that's okay, right? Because you're not derailing the exploration. You're enhancing it, right? You're giving them the opportunity to do it. Now, you know what I mean? So there's difference, there's little nuances in it. But I would say, that's exactly, that's great, right? How much is a butterfly weight, right? So just, things like that. I think, we want to sometimes give the answer because we think we're supposed to, right? We're adults. We're supposed to know all this stuff, right? We're supposed to be the givers of knowledge, right? And in some ways it can feel like we're shirking our duties, right? As adults, to not give an answer. As a classroom teacher, look, like I said, I was a New York City public school teacher. I went to New York City public schools myself. What did I do? Especially my first year, I emulated how I was taught, right? And a lot of times it was the teacher had the knowledge. Luckily, though, as I was being trained as a teacher, and I got to know John Taylor Gatto. I don't know if you've ever heard of him, but he was kind of what I would say a responsible subversive, where he did a lot of things in the New York City public school system that was more along these lines that we're talking about. So it took me about a year to kind of, well, maybe, almost half of the first year to really, wait, I'm not doing that. I need to kind of get back to that. How do I do that? Yeah, right. I'm glad you got to meet him, Allison. I had many interactions with him, and not only was he brilliant, he was actually really funny as well. But
well, let me just say something.
Yeah,
He's like
sure.
one of the only people who's ever made me cry in public, because he gave us about, I went to this conference in London, and I was a new parent. I had a 2-year-old, and
Mhm.
he talked about his lessons of school, his famous stuff. And I just sat there and I just wept because I was recognizing all that damage. And he was so charismatic.
Yes.
Yeah. I'll shut up now.
Unfortunately, John passed away now. I can't remember how many years ago now, but he was actually really closely connected with Arrow, and so I knew John for a long time. But the idea is, what I'm saying is that again, I sort of fell into that trap. I have to have the knowledge, right? I'm the teacher, right? I'm supposed to be the one with the knowledge. And so we've all done that, but again, I think we have to kind of resist that. And again, feel it out a little bit, because again, not every child you can play the 20 questions game with either, right? Because sometimes sometimes that might frustrate them a bit, right? And turn them off from that. So I also want to add, and jumping off of what I just said, is knowing the child well, right? Knowing kind of like, okay, with this child, I can do those 20 questions. They're going to keep coming back for more, right? They're eating it up. They love it. That's their personality, right? That's what they want. This one, maybe I can do 10 questions or 5, right? And then maybe I can go from 5 to 6, right? Maybe the next day you can do those things. So it's just about, and sometimes you have to build towards those things, especially if, the young person you're working with has been in a conventional school. And look, I'm not here to trash conventional schools. I'm not at all. I think there are some well-meaning things happening there. And for some, and I know this is kind of a worldwide phenomena, is that for some kids, right, the conventional school that they go to is the safest, best place they have, right? And they get food and they get whatever, right? And so but the thing is that a lot of times in the conventional system, it's about what we just talked about it's sort of the opposite of what we're saying it to, right? It's sort of like the adults are the holders of the knowledge, and so it's more about, okay, sit in these desks, and I'm going to pour my knowledge into your brain. And you know what, at the end of this class, all that knowledge is going to stay there, and you're going to know what to do with it. And as we know, that's not really how it works. So I don't want to get too far down that rabbit hole, because that's another really interesting discussion. But I think that there's that, right? It's about being able to, ask questions, not feel like and even if you know it, and I know that's when it's really even harder, right? When you know the answer, you're like, oh, if I just said this, I would save them 2 hours, right? If I just told them the answer. And I know, trust me, I have been there, and I have watched group processes with young people and democratic, we've had that. And I've just had to kind of sit on it, and just be like, all right, they're going to work this out, and look, I'm not saying I've never, thrown a little pearl in there once in a while to be like, hey, I hear you're talking about, renovating the whole east wing of the building. Just so you know, we shared that building with somebody, right? You know what I mean? So like something like that, I think, can be okay. We share that building with somebody else, right? And then you just kind of leave it there, right? It's not that you're like, we share that building with somebody else, and you kind of do that. Just so, sometimes that's going to save some time. Sometimes I've let that go and be like, you know what? They'll find out that we share that building. They'll find out we share that parking lot, right? If they don't know it already, they'll come across it. And I think you just build on that, right? You build on a process of that kind of empowerment, right? And I think, empowerment can be, how do I say, like it's really a part of everything you do. That's how I look at it, right? And so especially for when you're homeschooling, or you're maybe part of a homeschooling group, right? Empowerment really becomes part of everything, right? So it's not just about, okay, what do I learn, right? It's not just about empowering, okay, I can learn through my interests. It's about empowering about everything. And that's where it can get really tricky, right? Because it's kind of like a democratic process in your house, right? Where it's like, wait, I'm going to ask this 4-year-old what time they want to go to bed. Oh man, I don't know. I don't know about that. That's where it can get tricky. Now, again, when, a 4-year-old is different than an 8-year-old, right? Even. And of course, there's going to be different, there's going to be different ways to do that, depending on where they are developmentally. But it is kind of about that idea, right? It's about, how do I bring this idea into everything that we do? So what do y'all think about that? And have you had experiences doing that? And what does that feel like when you do it?
I'll go, Peter. There's times when you're talking about that you want to help out and want to share, but I've learned the technique. I've put my tongue behind my top teeth, because you can't talk very well when your tongue behind your top teeth, and then you also become, I think, that through the empowerment part, and you help you yourself as the parent or facilitator become the witness, and you're actually teaching the child to become the witness of what they're doing. So when you were away from your parents where you shouldn't have been, you had to look at the situation from a different angle, going, yes, I can deal with this. No, I can't. So it's not just being in it and getting anxious and getting, all absorbed in it, going, you can actually stand back and take action. And I think it's hard for adults, because we want to look good, be right, and know. And yet, how do you learn anything? Well, you probably don't look so great sometimes. When you learn to walk, for example, you fall over, you don't know what you're doing, and you get it wrong. So and so holding the space for yourself and the child to do, like I call it, a dance, has been really, really powerful, over the years. And yeah, now they do things, you know, I've got, they're 18, the ones I homeschool for, we're in our 8th year, 18 and 15 year old boys, and they do something, I'm going, I have to breathe because that's how I brought them up. But that's that's probably not what I do now. But you know, one's doing university, a Bachelor of Music, but he's actually only there to do a couple of subjects. I don't think there's any intention of finishing it. Where in our day, it was, we're definitely finishing it. And he didn't go there to fail. He went there, Mum, you've taught me that I can learn what I want to learn. And I've researched, this is the only place I can learn that, and that, and get the practical experience and get on the stage with an ensemble. So I'm going to just do the first 2 semesters and get out, you know, and I'm breathing, going, okay, as long as you have fun, mate. Yeah, great. So yeah, that's, he's self-empowered though.
Yeah, that's amazing. And yeah, Megan, I'm glad that you said, you know, you're still learning, right? And then you find that when there's times when, like you're saying, like you can't, or you don't feel well, you know, that the kids are able to do it, right? And so this is a learning process, and I think it's okay for kids to know that you're learning it too, right? And I think that is so powerful. I remember back when I was working on my my doctorate, and I had to take doctoral level statistics, right? So how do you interpret all that? And now, you know, I'm good at my maths and all that, but that's a totally different thing. And it just so happened that at that time, I was actually helping a group of students with their maths, right? So I told them, I said, look, I'm struggling with statistics. I can tell you, it's not fun. Can I figure it out? Yes. And what I worked through my process with them, right? To say, okay, I get that if you're struggling and maths aren't your favorite, and maybe, you know, you'd rather be doing something else. But let's talk about how we figure this out, right? How do we look at it? What is this really? And what we came up with is really about figuring out where to plug things in, right? Right, kind of order of operations idea, right? And then, yeah, of course, being able to do something with it. Okay, why am I measuring that, right? What do I want to know? What is that even? Why do I even have to measure it, right? What is that going to give me? You know, what is that for, kind of idea. But yeah, well, but I think that what was powerful about that is that they saw that I was learning too. I've talked to students a lot about, hey, this is and especially like going through the democratic process, you're learning all the time, right? I'm learning how to do this better. You know, I've done it. I've had some experiences with it, but I'm learning all the time. And so I think saying that to students, and you know, the young people that you work with, or, you know, have in your home, I'm not really sure. I want to try this though, right? Because I think it's important, and I'm learning too. And there's gonna be times when I come up against my own limitations, biases, nerves, right, around things, just, you know, that kind of stuff. And I think the number one thing that I find, I mean, if I could really boil this all down, if you were to ask me, look, you know, what's really the main thing? It's really about that kind of honesty, right? Young people really like that, right? When adults are honest. Now, yeah, sometimes they want to feel like, okay, the adults know the answers and I'm safe and I'm all that. But I think the idea of being honest, like, look, you know, we're going to figure this out. And no, I don't know all of this, but there's some things that I do know, and I do have life experience, right? And I do have all those things. And I think that's the key, right? Is that kind of level of honesty, especially as they're getting a little. So I want to be careful when I say this. It's not that I'm suggesting not to be honest with younger children, but especially as they get older, in terms of like where you can go with the honesty, right? And how you can do that, right? Again, you know, I keep talking about 4-year-olds, so we'll use that example. I've used the example way back in the beginning when I talked about the incident that happened here a couple of days ago in the States. I've had as young as, you know, 4-year-old students ask me about things like that. and especially I've also had experience in September 11th, right? So, and then all the way up through, you know, adults and you know, and all of that. And I think, you know, when, well, you know, 4-year-olds sometimes can ask those really profound questions of you, right? Like, what do you think? Or how are you doing? Or how do you feel? Right. And I'm like, wow, nobody asked me that. You're the first person to ask me that. How do I feel? Right. And so you could say, you know, I'm kind of sad, you know, like things like that, without getting into the whole, right. But they can understand that. And they do appreciate that. There's actually this documentary on Sesame Street, right? And I just watched it the other night. I think it's about a couple years old. I think it's called Street Gangs, How We Got to Sesame Street, something like that. It was really interesting how they were saying about, you know, not to play down to kids, right? And that they were honest. And I think one of the people on the show, I shouldn't say I think, one of the people on the show passed away. I think it was the guy that like owned the store or whatever. And they did a whole thing on that, right, on the show. And it was about how do you access, right? How do you talk about that? And like they were saying, you know, what they did is they did a lot of research on what do kids understand about death. And younger kids didn't quite understand that that person wouldn't be coming back, right? So they did a whole thing with one of the big bird, right? Big Bird, the big yellow bird. They did a whole thing around talking with Big Bird about that, because apparently the character of Big Bird was childlike, right? And it was sort of purposely like this, you know, sort of innocence. And so they did that. So the idea is, you know, getting back to the point I was making is, you know, that level of honesty, you know, you can do that, you know, really, right, across all developmental levels. It's just about how do you do that, and how would they be able to access that, right? So I think that is important to say, look, I don't know, like I've, you know, I'm learning as, you know, you're learning, and yeah, there's some things I do know. I'll tell you things that I do know, right? And I'll tell you how I'm feeling, and I'll tell you how I think it's going. You know, but they really appreciate that. Yeah, so absolutely, right? It builds trust. And yeah, working through, right? Working through my working things out. Yeah. My kids told me that when they were little, they thought adults, yeah, right. And so some of them do think that. They think adults don't cry, or they think adults don't get sad, or they don't get their feelings hurt, right? And that they're perfect and that they know everything, right? I'm sure we've all had that experience, right? Where you find out one of your parents is not perfect, right? Right. You think, you know, when we were little, right? You find out, oh, right. Yeah, they don't really know how to do it, right? Yeah. So Allison, thank you so much for coming, and I hope we get a chance to interact again. But yeah, so like all of those things that we're talking about, right, is it's again about that, just, and all of those things go into empowerment, right? And so no, we're not perfect, and there's going to be days where, you know, we're going to be better at it than others, right? It's just how life is. And again, I think being able to have that conversation is so powerful too. Like, look, there's going to be days, man, where I come home, or we are both home, or whatever, and at the end of the day, I'm exhausted, I'm tired, you know, or, you know, I had an interaction with somebody that didn't go well, and I'm feeling whatever, right? You know, and right now my capacity for empowering you, right, is lower than it was the other day, right? And that's okay, right? It's okay to have that conversation. And I think all that is really important. So I wanted to open it up for any questions. I know we have just about a few minutes left. So I wanted to open up for questions or comments or anything else.
Yeah, Peter, the link, I think you've covered it. You've covered it, but just that link in your words to that self-determination, that empowerment, how it can make the child, or allow the child to even dig in that bit further. So you probably said that just then, actually, that I can't figure it out yet, but I will. Is that what you mean by the self-determination?
Yeah. So I think at the end of the day, right, what we're all interested in talking about, right, is that kind of idea of self-determination, right? So this kind of idea of empowerment leads to self-determination, right? And to me, that, right, the self-determination is, again, I mean, and it's probably going to sound very quaint, right? But it's really about, all right, I can, right, shape the course of my life. I can, I have a lot of I have a lot of say in how this goes. So I feel, right, that I can do this, that I have this kind of idea there. So I would say it's the whole thing that we've been talking about, the process of empowerment, right, is really about this idea of self-determination. And so by building all the things that we talked about, right, that, like, we were just talking about the idea of being honest and having those conversations and allowing students, right, I'm saying students, but allowing, children to have choices and make mistakes and, fall in that hole, right? And, get themselves up out of that hole and, full of mud or whatever. But you know what? It's that's part of it. And so the idea of self-determination is like, look, it's because they're given that freedom, right, to explore themselves, to know themselves. And really, in essence, a lot of self-determination comes from self-knowledge, right? So I know myself really well. I can tell you that I know something about myself where if I go into a room with, hundreds of people, I have to be on the perimeter of the room, right? I just do. That's how I feel comfortable. That's the kind of learner I am. It works, right? I just know that's who I am. And so how that leads to self-determination is, okay, I can decide whether I want to be part of something like that. And if I am part of something like that, I know that there's things that I can do, right? So yeah, so the idea of self-determination is really wrapped up in all the things that we were just saying, right? Because self-determination isn't gonna, it's, how I say, like, if we kind of take a step back and say, now we sort of are disempowering young people, self-determination is going to be really tough after that. They're not going to feel like they have self-determination. It's all going to be sort of external, right? Oh, well, it's this, it's that, the weather's bad today, right? That kind of thing, right? It's that. So yes.
Thank you very much.
Yeah. How do you know you're getting it right? Perfect. And how do you stop the voices in your head of self-doubt? Wow. You might not like my answer, but there is no necessarily getting it right. I think what I would say is, are there signs where it's like, this is becoming disempowering and this is becoming something different? Yeah. And I would say, when you see signs of disempowerment, it's like, again, like I was just talking about, the locus of control is everything else around me, right? It's not me. I can't do anything about it, right? And look, obviously there's things we can't do, right? Like the weather, like we were just saying, but it's like every other factor is affecting my self-determination. That's when you kind of know, well, wait, it's not quite going where it needs to. Now, one thing I will say, and I've watched this over the, I don't know, almost 30 years now that I've been doing this, is especially when it's new for young people, it can take a year or more to kind of undo that idea of, right? I've watched students come into, democratic schools and other schools, and it's taken them a while for that. It's almost like the idea of unschooling, right? It's like you have to kind of unschool first in order to be able to do that. So it can take a while. So, with that in mind, if it's like, oh, we're 3 months in and it's not, well, it might take longer than that, right? So it's about that, and man, I hate this phrase, but I'm going to use it, trusting the process, right? Like trusting that you're going down a good road. And in the beginning, you know, a lot of times, again, when it's like, okay, you're free to learn what you want. And if they're not used to that, that can be a little jolting, right? That can be a little unsettling. Sometimes it's fine, right? Sometimes, but for some young people, that's unsettling. It's like, whoa, man, this is kind of about me. Okay, well, what do I want to learn? I don't know what I want to learn, right? But that's okay because they'll find it, right? You can see that there's things that they naturally gravitate towards, right? Even if it's, you know, if they're doing video games and they're doing things like that, okay, they're interested. Let's learn about that. Let's talk about it. You know, things like that. All right, there's a couple more comments I want to make sure. Yeah, so sometimes, you know, if a young person is struggling with the idea of too much choice, like, you know, I always like to say, you know, you go into the donut shops, right? And they have like 75 different kinds of donuts. And it's like, I don't know, chocolate, triple chocolate. I don't know, right? It's kind of like that idea. Like, I love chocolate, but there's like 12 different kinds of chocolate donuts. Which one do I want? Kind of idea, right? So eventually, right, you kind of whittle it down. Okay, well, what do you know, okay, so I think I might like to learn about, you know, these 5 things. But that's like, wow, that seems like a lot. Okay, what do you think you want to do first? I'm not really sure. Okay, so if you could only choose 2 things, what is it, right? So it's kind of like that. It's kind of like going through the process of, okay, let's kind of take this down a little bit, right? You're free to learn those other things at any other time. That's the idea, right? It's like the beauty of this is that doesn't go away, right? If I wanted to learn about butterflies, like we were talking about, I can learn that 2 years from now, right? I don't have to learn that today. I mean, and maybe I'll learn it through experiences, but you understand? So like sometimes helping them kind of navigate that a little bit to say, okay, I can see that this is a little difficult and it's a little unsettling. You know, let's talk about, okay, so, you know, by the questioning that we were talking about maybe about 10 or 15 minutes ago, how do you deal with the situation when they disengage from all learning and can smell? Oh, that's great, right? Isn't that great that they can do that? They can smell it a mile away, can't they? Right? And they know it. And they can, right? They can sniff that stuff out. And they can sniff out when you're being disingenuous too, right? They can sniff that out too. So, and I know we just have about a minute here, so I don't want to keep you from any other sessions. But I would say, right, and being snuck into gaming. So, you know, when they start to disengage from things, to kind of let that happen just a bit, right? So it's like disengaging from learning, but are they really disengaging from learning? Because they're learning all the time, right? We're always learning, right? There's input, right? There's things that are happening. So what does that look like? So what, you know, when they're disengaging, what is it that they're doing that's different, right? So maybe they're going into gaming, right? I mean, I know something about gaming, but I'm not a gamer. But my God, those graphics are amazing, right? All of that. A lot of that actually isn't it isn't really detrimental. I mean, if that's all you do and you never leave the house and you never, you know, and okay, you know, maybe after a while of that, it can be like, all right, we need to at least get you some sunshine kind of idea. But so to just notice, right, what, when they're engaging, what kind of other things are they doing? And so there's an interest there. And I don't want to make assumptions about the question, but I've heard when people ask me this, sometimes they're looking at, okay, but are there other things I should worry about, right? Are they depressed? Are they whatever? That's, you know, of course that's always possible, right? I think when they're disengaging, you want to kind of understand why that's happening. So I can say, are they disengaging because they're really into this game and they want to go do that and that's their interest at the moment? Or are they disengaging from like everybody, right? Like they don't want, they're totally shutting down. The online gaming community is actually pretty interactive, right? If you're playing with other people, you're talking to people, right? You're doing all that kind of thing. So it's social in a way. Again, I'm not an expert on it. So I don't want to misspeak, but I've seen it enough to know that that's a lot of what happens, that there is a lot of interaction. So yeah, okay, I'm really glad to hear that, Anya. I would love to stay and talk, but I know there's some other things going on, so I don't want to keep you from other sessions. I will actually drop my email here in the chat.
You are the last session we have. It's 8 o'clock at night here, so we have
Oh, right.
nothing
I'm sorry. I'm thinking.
afterwards.
Yeah, I totally, right, totally. All right, so I'm gonna put my email in the chat, and I do want to invite you all to the Aero conference in June. It's from June 25th to the 27th. Like I said, Peter Gray will be giving one of the keynotes. Actually, Dana Martin as well, who I mentioned, I don't know, probably about 30 minutes ago. So yeah, so I can stay for a couple more minutes. I mean, you know, I wish there was a script, right? I wish there was just like, okay, you know, go plug this in. But wouldn't that be sort of the antithesis of what we're talking about, right? Like, here's your McDonald's plan, right? And go make all these McDonald's everywhere, right? Which there's a reason why McDonald's did that, right? Which is really interesting, because they knew that, well, one, it worked, and two, it's anybody in any part of the world can walk in and actually do that job, right? Or know what they're getting. Which in some ways is brilliant, and in some ways is like, but yeah, the other thing I want to say is that, you know, you're doing well, and yeah, maybe there's going to be some days where you're going to question this, and you're going to feel like, what did I do? What? I'm like, what did I sign up for? Right. And there might be days like that. Just know that the days like that are, you know, and they are important, right? They are part of this. It's, you know, some of this is hard, you know, self-determination can be hard. I've watched students who realize they had the self-determination and all of a sudden be like, uh-oh, right? I have self-determination now. Huh. There's a lot of responsibility in that, isn't there? Right? You have a lot of how do I say, a lot of privilege, sort of, right? Or it opens up a lot of things for you, but there's also a lot of responsibility that comes with that. And I think what we're talking about is all of those things when you're giving them those experiences of having that kind of freedom, and, you know, then they're sort of that even when they have that sort of breakthrough of like, oh, wow, they're still okay with it. I mean, they might, you know, it might be jolting for just a bit, right? Because like, oh wow, now this is kind of more about me, right? But they're ready for it, right? They're there because they've experienced it. So it's not like this totally new thing. That's a lot of times what happens, right? In conventional school, you know, some students now are starting at like 3 years old. They're going to pre-K, right? And and now look, a lot of pre-K, yeah, they play and they do all that. So okay, fair enough. But, you know, they're going to like a structured kind of thing from when they're 3 years old to when they're 18. So basically from when they're 3, they're being told when they can go to the bathroom, how they can go to the bathroom, right? That kind of thing. And then all of a sudden at 18, magically, they're supposed to be good at making decisions, right? Like, oh, now you graduated. You should be good at this. It's like, but I never had a chance to make any decisions. How do I know, right? So, you call it, what's the wobblies? Tell me about that.
We call it the wobbles, when you have that moment of self-doubt. Yeah.
Right. And look, I mean, self-doubt sometimes is good, right? Because we're reflecting, we're like, oh, okay, I don't really know this and I'm not really sure. That's okay. And like we talked about earlier, even if the young people know that, right? Like, you know, we're working on this, and we're working through this. I wish actually a friend of mine was here, a friend of mine from South Africa, who has actually gone through this with her 3 children. And I can't tell you how many schools they've tried, and they've gone all the way just through back and forth. And she's basically had to have the conversations with her children. I'm like, I'm not really sure. I don't know. We're going to do this. We're going to try it. We're going to see how it goes. And it's, it again, there's days when that works and there's days when, it's going to be a little tricky, but I believe at the end, it all really, it works. Right. And then you have now these empowered, young adults or, youngsters that are really appreciative of the process. One thing I want to say before I do jump off here in a minute is that I want to just make a distinction between, sometimes people say when I talk about this, especially to parents who have students in conventional school, they think I'm saying totally right, totally hands off, uncaring, cold, unnurturing. That's not what I mean at all. It's the opposite of that. It's like, yes, I'm here for support. Yeah, I'm going to support you. Yeah, man, that was hard. And I can understand why you're disappointed. I get that, so it's really, it's actually a way more engaging process. Right. And sometimes there is going to be frustration. And like we said, sometimes you can sneak an answer in here, in there, want to answer too, right? Kind of thing to kind of ease it a little bit. We just got to kind of sometimes resist jumping in right away. Right. And just knowing, and look, you all have good instincts, right? You all know, right? So you have to kind of trust yourself a little bit too. And if something really does go kind of the way you don't want it to go, you can regroup and you can really, and that can be a really powerful learning experience. It was really so wonderful to speak with you all. Like I said, I hope I see you all again at some point. And I know it's kind of getting late in your part of the world. I do want to get myself out there one day. So I hope to do that. I'm actually a big, as you would pronounce it there, Tolkien fan. Lord of the Rings, Hobbit. And I've been they always have events. They call it the Oxenmoot over at Oxford. And I've been wanting to go to it for years. And I just have never been able to, figure out travel and timing and all that. But I do want to get there one day. So
we plan to have you live in person at the next Learn Free.
That would be awesome. I would love that. Again, thank you all so much. Have a great rest of your evening, and hope to hear from you all soon.
Thank you so much for
take care.
It was
Yeah,
really good. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you for having me.